So today we're looking at modes, and modes are basically a way of achieving a lot of cool sounds and also unlocking the whole fretboard so that you're not necessarily trapped inside of a box. If you've ever played the 5 shapes of the pentatonic scale, it's, in a sense, you've played the 5 modes of the pentatonic scale. As you go from shape to shape, you're actually playing the same scale, but with just starting from a different note within the scale. So it's kind of like they're jumbled around a little bit, but all the same notes. So the modes we're looking at today are the basic modes of the major scale. So there's 7 notes in a major scale, hence there are 7 possible shapes that we could use. Just like there's 5 notes in a pentatonic scale, there's 5 possible shapes that you could use. So one thing that doesn't hurt to be aware of is the 1-string major scale, and also the previous lesson where we looked at all the chords within a key, which basically we went up the 1-string major scale. And for every one of those notes in this case G scale, there was a chord that goes with it. And now in the world of modes, there's also a scale or shape or a mode that goes with it too. So there's always a chord for each note in the scale, and there's always a mode for each note that's in the scale. In this G scale, we have G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then we're back to G again. So if we wanted to do mode 2 of a G scale, for example, we would go to the second note, 1, 2. This is where mode 2 or shape 2 would be. If we wanted to do the 5th mode, we'd find note 5. And that's where mode 5 or shape 5 would be. And each one of these shapes or modes has a wacky name that goes along with it. Technically, you don't need to know the name to play it, but we're going to go over the names. I'm also going to include PDFs that have 2 possible ways of doing these shapes. We're going to look at shapes that keep you within a position, that don't shift basically from fret to fret, and we'll also look at shapes that consistently make sure there's 3 notes per string, which does require us to shift up the fretboard a little bit sometimes, but even though they're bigger shapes with more fret span, they often can be easier. So it's good to know both versions, take them one at a time, and we'll look at them now. So starting on G, the first mode, or the first scale, is G Ionian. And Ionian is basically a fancy way of saying major scale. So this is the G major scale in a closed position where we're not shifting at all. Now if we were to do that same shape where we consistently keep 3 notes per string and shift, it would look like this. Up to note 2 of G, 1, 2. This is where mode 2 would be. The name for mode 2 is Dorian. So this is a non-shifting version of what we could call A Dorian, which is basically still just a G scale starting from note 2. If we were to do a 3-note per string where we shift a little bit, it would look like this. And of course there's multiple ways of to finger these patterns. I'm showing you some of the favorite ways that I like to do it. that takes us to mode 3, which is called Phrygian. So we find note 3. So that's a B, so we're playing B Phrygian. Still technically all the notes of a G major scale. So here's the no shifting, not worrying about 3 notes per string version. Now if we were to go 3 notes per string, we would have. That takes us to mode 4, which is Lydian. So we find note 4. 1, 2, 3, half step to note 4, which is a C. So we're playing C Lydian, another different name for basically a G scale starting on one of the middle notes. So C Lydian, no shifting. And then 3 notes per string. And that takes us to mode 5. So we find note 5, which is D. So this will be D Mixolydian, and this is the non-shifting version. And if we go 3 notes per string, and that takes us to number 6, which is called Aeolian. And Aeolian is basically a fancy way of saying minor scale. So this is a standard minor scale when we get to number 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's E. This is E Aeolian, or an E minor scale. No shifting. And then 3 notes per string. And then the 7th note, or the 7th mode of the scale. So on this F sharp, the last note of the scale is Locrian. So this is the final mode that we have. Locrian with no shifting. And then lastly, Locrian with 3 notes per string. So those are all of the possible shapes. I mean, of course, there's other ways of doing it too. Those are 2 possible shapes for each of the 7 modes that are based around the major scale. So that's important to know, is that there are modes for every type of scale. There's 7 modes of a melodic minor scale. There's 7 modes of a harmonic minor scale. These are the first and important ones to learn before you delve into any of that kind of stuff. So these are going to open up the fretboard quite a bit for you, because remember, all those names and all those shapes that we just looked at, they were still all a G major scale. So if you were in the key of G, it means every single one of those shapes is available to you all the time. Some notes might be better to land on than others at times, depending on what chords you're playing over, but it doesn't change the fact that we're in the key of G, and you can use any one of those positions at any time. So you don't necessarily have to go to G and play a G major scale over here. If you're in the key of G, you could go up to the 3rd note and use this Phrygian shape or mode 3 shape in the key of G, and it would work just as well as if you were using a G scale down at G. So that's the shapes, and that's how they connect to each other and how you can use all of them at all times. That doesn't necessarily give you the sound of individual modes, because this is like the other half of the battle, is being able to create the sound of, let's say, Phrygian or Dorian or whatever mode you choose. If you're playing over a G chord and you go and play the Phrygian scale up here at B at note 3, it still is going to kind of take on this G major sound, because it's still technically a G major chord. If you focus on chord 3, which kind of goes back to the previous lesson about diatonic chords, you really focus on that 3rd note, and you use the scale, and inside of that scale, focus on that note. That's what's going to give you the sound of Phrygian. So it takes on this very specific sound. It doesn't sound like a happy G major scale anymore, even though those are all notes from a G major scale. If you played the 2nd chord, A minor, starting in G is 1, A is 2, chord 2 is minor, and you play Dorian, and you make that A, or that note 2, the main focus that you keep hinting at. That's what says this sounds like Dorian instead of just another shape of G major. So it's important to first learn all these shapes, get used to connecting them, go up and go down, be able to weave in and out of all the different shapes. But if you ever are trying to accomplish a specific mode sound, you have to focus on whatever number note or number chord you're going for. Lydian is mode number 4. So if you go to note 4, which is a C, and you have a C major chord, or chord 4, and you're focusing a lot on that C note, you'll start to hear the sound of Lydian. So 2 approaches, basically, when it comes to modes, aside from learning all the shapes, is 1, being able to play in a key at any part of the fretboard that you want. And then number 2 is being able to create a very, very specific sound by focusing on, let's say, note 3 or note 5. And even though it's a G scale, thinking about what that other note is as the home base, almost thinking of it as the root, even though it's not the root. That's how you get those sounds. I like to use Phrygian as an example because it creates a very, very obvious sound that's almost hard to mistake for anything else. If we focus on that 3rd note heavily and always come back to it, while still only playing these notes from G major, we hear a very specific sound. Kind of a Arabic or Latin kind of sound. It takes on its own vibe. It's the Phrygian sound. So it's important to, as you get comfortable with the shapes, which is the first step, to try and really zone in on one of them and focus on that main note and see what kind of sound you get from that mode. You won't get the same kind of major sound out of Mixolydian as you will Ionian, just as you won't get the same kind of minor sound from Aeolian that you do from Dorian or Phrygian. So a lot of experimenting to do. First, just start by trying to get all those shapes down, at least one version of each, and if you can eventually do the 3 notes per string or the non-shifting one, if you could do it all, even better.